Hey, deserving listeners. So someone actually suggested in the comments section that after I finish watching a series that I make another video with my final thoughts. And I thought that was a genius idea. So I thought I would start now. After completing 90 Day Fiancé, The Last Resort, Season 1, I thought I would provide my final thoughts. So after watching the show and reacting to it, I took some time just now, past couple hours, and thought about all 10 people and their relationships with each other, and thought I would provide a summary of my final thoughts. And I thought I would start with the show in general. And I thought that it was nice that they attempted to have therapy for the couples, because, you know me, I'm always talking about that. And it's more than just one session that they are having, so that's good. But not much therapy was depicted, really. And I understand that, I guess, because in order to make the show entertaining, they can't get bogged down in showing us a bunch of boring therapy moments. I've talked about this before, but early in my career, I thought, wow, in therapy, either as a client or as a therapist, it's so dramatic. There are so many things happening. It's such an exciting, dynamic, just mind-blowing experience from both sides of the room, whether I'm a therapist or a client. But when I would film sessions for my own learning or for my supervisor, or I'd watch as a professor, I would watch videos, or as a supervisor myself, I would watch videotaped sessions of my supervisees in session, and I would find that the videos were not very interesting. I mean, sometimes they were, but they didn't show the drama and the power that therapy can be. It just looked dry and just, this calm conversation between two people. So I can imagine that for the show, they're thinking, well, we can't really show most of the therapy that's happening because it's just not very compelling television. So, I get that. But I wish that we would have seen more. I also wish that we would have known how much therapy actually happened, which we still don't really know. Another thing to think about is that this show could help to destigmatize therapy and couple therapy in particular. For you and me, we understand that therapy is okay, but the vast majority of people don't necessarily know that. So having a show like this that reaches the mass audience could help with that. I imagine that it probably did in some way. Also, the therapy that was depicted, as you saw from my reactions, that I thought that some of the therapy showed was a good example of therapy, some of it not so much, or maybe not so much. And some was just not my style. That's always the thing. It's hard for me to watch other people do therapy without feeling like, ooh, that's not what I would have done. So when I have that feeling, I have to check in with myself and ask, well, is that because it's just not my style? Which doesn't necessarily mean that what I'm watching is bad. Or is it bad? Is it harmful? Is it risky? Is it a problem? And I hopefully reacted accordingly about that, but I don't really know. So I bet you there were times when there were things being shown on the screen that were not my style that I misinterpreted as possibly being bad therapy. That's a likelihood in all of my reactions, so I want to just point that out. The other thing is I can't know if it's good or bad therapy because I'm not in the room. I can't talk to the client. I can't talk to the therapist. We're only seeing these little snippets. It's just, there's no way for me to know, of course. I'm just reacting to the bits that we're seeing. The other thing about the show is it was a little disappointing that, it was very disappointing, but it was only a little disappointing because I knew this would happen, and that the major issues that I was hoping would be addressed in these individuals were not addressed. But I'm pretty sure at the very beginning of reacting to the show, I said something like that. I said something like, we're probably not going to see mind-blowing therapy occur, so I need to demote my expectations here. All right, so let's talk about Ed and Liz here. So we know Ed and Liz pretty well because they've been on the show many times, and we've seen a lot of different types of triggers and behaviors. And of course, I can only speculate based on the edit. There's no way to know if any of this is accurate. It probably isn't accurate in all likelihood, so I just want to say all that. But from the edit, and the reason why I even provide these speculations is not to identify issues within Ed and Liz, but to actually give everyone in the audience a chance to think about themselves, to think about their own issues or their own lives, not as a replacement for therapy, of course, but maybe as an adjunct to therapy, or you're a therapist yourself, or you aren't in therapy yet and you just want to be inspired to go to therapy, or you want to know what to work on at therapy. There's a lot of reasons why I do this, but let's keep that in mind. So with Ed, I think there's a fair amount of evidence going back to the very first season that he was on with Rose that points to, and he alluded to this in this final episode as well, that he has deep shame and a deep lack of self-esteem, that he believes that he is inherently rejectable. But it's the sort of feeling that is accompanied with an anger. So you can imagine being a child and you're being rejected or abandoned in some way, you're being mistreated, and you have a childish understanding of the scenario, the situation. You just feel like inherently you're not good enough. You don't have the ability, even if people are telling you, if like your dad abandons you and your mom is telling you, look, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You're a lovely boy. You're a wonderful kid. And he just decided to move to another state or whatever. The child hearing that, it'll help, but it doesn't necessarily take away the propensity for that child to believe that the dad would have stuck around if he were different, if he was a better kid or some other unknown metric that he could have been better at. So he gives the vibe of someone that went through something like that perpetually or in some major significant way. And that feeling, because we've all had that feeling of rejection and being, not good enough or something. But there's a version of that that can be retained into adulthood from childhood that still retains the childish way of looking at it. Also, the anger that can be accompanied that, because the child, part of them knows that there's something wrong here. When children are being rejected, they feel an injustice. Like when your kid is feeling insecure or a little distant and they want to be picked up, but they're at that age where it's starting to break your back, and you're just like, okay, I can't, you're going to have to walk on your own. And the child feels rejected in that moment, and sometimes they will get angry. They'll be like, ugh, and then they'll sit down and be like, I'm not going anywhere. They're having a temper tantrum, they're upset, they're angry at you. So the rejection can carry with it a lot of anger and a lot of self-centered attacking of other people. And the vibe that he gives off when he is triggered, it has that flavor to it. It's not just feeling like he's worthless or that he is inherently rejectable. It's also like it's assumed that he's being rejected for wrong reasons, right? And it is revealed in his speech to Liz when he is triggered. He goes on the attack, right? During the season, he would say things like, you don't stand up for me, and you made me feel like I wasn't a man. You emasculated me. You never have my back. Things like this patterned way of complaining or being ridiculous, because in each of those moments, I reacted in a way that it didn't seem to be rational, right? So when people are irrational and repeatedly irrational, the conclusions that people come to is, of course, is that Ed is a narcissist or something like that. But in my world, the top hypotheses have to do with, well, what belief or schema or trauma is he operating from? And it's quite possible that he was treated in a way in which he was not stood up for. People did not stand up for him. They didn't stand in his corner when they should have, when he was a child, and he was defenseless. So he was in that state of rejection and not getting that loyalty or that dedication and being made to feel small. And he knew that it wasn't okay, but yet it was happening. And so whenever there's any kind of opportunity for him to transfer that trauma on to Liz or anyone else, he will do that. So I think that in this season, it clarified that trauma that I think I identified in the very first season. And also, he has a style of fighting and communicating his upsettedness to Liz that is patterned and repetitive, in that he will be irrationally attacking of her, critical of her. And then when she pulls away far enough, then he will revert to this nice mode, and then he will apologize, at least in words. She will soften, and then he will go on the attack. Because, one of the things to think about for yourself and your relationships is if you just word it in a way that you're looking at it from above. Because, when we watch Ed, it's easy to get into the mix of it, to become undifferentiated from it and just be like, "Ooh, you jerk face, you're a jerk face." But it's another angle to look at it is, well, what are the themes? Well, the themes are that whenever there's any kind of indication that Liz is not completely in his corner, like when they were at their engagement party and this mystery woman that she used to work with, who happens to be a lesbian, although that doesn't really have anything to do with the facts on the ground. Her, I don't know if she was invited, but this person came to the party, and Liz and this woman had some sort of off-camera, or maybe it was on camera, and they didn't include it. That's my suspicion, honestly, for whatever reason. Like they couldn't get the release, or I don't know. And they had a fight. Liz and this woman had a fight. And then for Ed, for whatever reason, either something else was happening, like he already felt a little distant from Liz for some other reason, or the fact that Liz was even just talking with other people, he felt alone, or that he saw his, the love of his life, Liz, seemingly having emotions with someone else, and it just triggered something in him around cheating, and he became irrationally convinced that she had sex with this woman in the past. And it didn't make, in the beginning of that whole fight, I'm like, well, is Liz bisexual? Is there a history of that? And from what I can tell, Liz was saying, what are you talking about? I'm not bisexual. I'm not a lesbian. I've never been with a woman. What are you talking about? One, two, we were fighting. So, anyway, we've been down that road. So if I'm undifferentiated, then I'm in that zone, right? I'm just like, what's wrong with him? But if we zoom out and we look at it, we see the themes, which is that there's an opportunity there for him to feel like she's not in his corner. And then he will, like if you didn't know the events that happened, if we couldn't evaluate the facts, if we just sort of were transported into the fight mid-fight, it would very much look like, oh, maybe she isn't in his corner. Maybe she is very flippant with his heart. Maybe she is very uncaring and disloyal. Doesn't look that way, right? Like during the infamous phone call that was leaked when she drove this other guy home because he didn't have a way to get home from work. And it has that cheating element, right? So those two stories. But in this season, he was triggered in ways that didn't have anything to do with cheating. I think it's just this loyalty thing. And of course, loyalty has a lot of negative connotations, but it's a good thing. I'm loyal to my wife. My wife is loyal to me. I'm loyal to my friends, to my family. They're loyal to me. They don't follow me. I don't follow them the way that, you follow a leader or something. But the loyalty is that, I prefer them. And if push comes to shove, like they need me and someone else needs me, then they get me. If my wife is needing me and wants to be with me, and somebody at work needs me and needs me to help them, then all things being equal, I'm absolutely going to be with my wife, and I will not be there for my friend. I'm loyal to my wife, okay? So he has that theme of disloyalty, and he sees disloyalty where it doesn't exist, seemingly, and reacts from a place where he feels very justified in attacking. So there's some schema at play, some relational trauma, some repetitive thing that happened to him around that. Now, some people will say, well, he was cheated on by his first wife, or he cheated on his first wife. I can't remember, but that wouldn't be my assumption. My assumption is that the disloyalty trauma, relational trauma, happened when he was in his childhood, throughout his childhood. Something happened. I don't know. So then when he goes on the attack, he feels completely justified, and there's really no way to break through to him, because if you say to him, no, I didn't do that, or how come you're treating me this way, or that sort of thing, he feels like, but you did that thing, so you deserve to be treated that way. Like if she had cheated on him right in front of him, she just went up to Jovi and started making out with him, and the two of them started rolling around, and Ed's just sitting there going, what? Ed would have the right, so to speak, to be very, very upset and to go on the attack in a way. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that in a healthy and unhealthy way, but in those situations, you would understand someone getting angry and very pointed in their criticism and not taking any excuse. If Liz was to say something like, what, it was just making out with him, what's the big deal? You can imagine Ed would be like, that doesn't matter. That's where he's operating from. He's operating from a place where he feels like something definitely happened when it didn't. And, we're into personality disorder territory, schema territory, that sort of thing. It's a well understood thing, with borderline individuals that are untreated and haven't recovered. These individuals will see betrayal where it doesn't exist. And I suppose we could fit some of this into that camp. And, it could be a viable hypothesis, not a full-blown diagnosis of borderline, but, on some traits or on the spectrum somewhere. It's certainly within that preoccupied and that camp of attachment reactivity. So with Liz, the trauma seems to be for her that she doesn't deserve to be treated well. So I'm guessing that she wasn't treated well in her childhood. We know that she had 2 marriages that were abusive to her. We don't know much beyond that. But in all likelihood, that those marriages weren't the original trauma. Did those marriages traumatize her? Probably. But this seems to be something that's, when people have a deep understanding that doesn't make any sense, it usually doesn't come from adulthood, because when we're raised well enough, we have established foundations of understanding that are, to some extent, they can be affected by our adult experiences, but they can't be completely dismantled by it. And for her, I can't know, it's just speculation. It seems as though there's really no part of her foundation that challenges the given to her that she doesn't deserve to be treated well. She doesn't deserve niceness. She doesn't deserve to be respected. Now, I will say that Liz is pretty good at communicating her needs. Throughout every season, pretty much, she's pretty good at advocating for herself. Now, when she does so, it usually falls on deaf ears, but she's pretty good. Like that moment at the hot tub when she's walking away, she was advocating for her needs. She was just wanting to go to bed, and she was willing to assert that. And as Angela and Ed were going after her at first, she was being very appropriate and saying, I just got to go. Now, sometimes she probably shoots herself in the foot by wording things in a particular way, but I don't fault her for that, honestly. It would be something that I would work on with someone like this. Not to say that she needs to change that, but it could be a better strategy to word, like in that moment at the hot tub, if she had said, something like, I'm just really tired. I'm really sorry, guys. You guys are the best. And, they're pressuring her. And she just was a broken record about that. She probably could have gotten away. But then she said something like, you guys are always, blabbing. Or she said something like that. And it wasn't even that pointed. It was something along those lines. It was justified. And all Angela and Ed had to do was be like, yeah, guilty as charged. But anyway, so she's pretty healthy in her ability to voice her concerns. And she does try to emphasize her needs when it's not initially being heard. Then Ed will double down and then she'll walk away. In the real world, she probably talks to a friend on the show. She'll end up doing a one-on-one interview. She seems to calm down after that. Then they re-engage, and Ed will probably pseudo-apologize or be nice at the very least. Liz sees these signs of niceness, and it might literally be the best she's ever been treated by any attachment figure. That's something to really contemplate, that I've said before, that in all of her close relationships, her mom, I don't know where her other, I don't know if she had other parents, her previous husbands, her, anything, she might have friends that treat her well, but no really close attachments. Ed might be by far the person who is close to her who has treated her the best. And that's kind of a scary proposition, right? It's kind of a scary reality. And to her, in contrast, Ed is a saint. Now, she knows something's going on, but she tolerates it because she's maybe thinking, well, you can't have everything. Plus, I don't deserve good things. Because, and I don't think it's full-blown I don't deserve. I think she has a big part of her that thinks she doesn't deserve. I think she has another part of her that knows that she does deserve. But I think she also has another part of her that desperately wants attachment, closeness, which of course everyone does. But if you've been denied it sufficiently growing up, then it's really hard to let go of a bad relationship, because at least it's a relationship. So I think that she has some of that going on. I don't know. The relationship, though, overall between the two of them, there are glimpses that behind the scenes that things are going okay. Not great. The pattern is probably playing itself out as we see it on camera, and it's probably happening off camera, maybe even being worse because of that leaked phone call, which isn't good. But overall, it's possible that they function 95% of the time not only okay, but actually pretty well, with a lot of affection and a lot of laughter and a lot of goodwill. So it's weird to say this, but they could be relatively okay moving into the future, with the occasional pattern cycle of him being triggered and then everything that I described. Now, can their relationship withstand that? Seemingly yes, because they've been through it countless times. They've broken up dozens of times. They on the show they talk about breaking up officially 15 times or something, but I imagine that they've broken up at least to some extent 100 times in their, I don't know how long they've been together, like 3 years or something. So maybe longer, probably longer, right? Anyway, at the same time, I could see them actually living relatively happily ever after. It's weird to say that, but I think that it is possible. I think as long as the triggering to Ed is kept at a minimum, they could be okay. It could also get worse, and it could also be much worse than we see it or I imagine it to be. Also, what we see is pretty bad. Now, could one make an argument that Liz is being abused emotionally? Yeah. So even if things are seemingly relatively okay moving into the future, is that a good thing or not? I don't know. A lot hinges on how Liz feels about it and whether or not she even knows how she feels about it. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're anything like me, your relationships are very important to you. And really, most of the reason why I make content, and perhaps a lot of the reason why you're here with me today, is to think about your relationships. And evidence shows that strong attachments contribute to all sorts of positive outcomes, like improved well-being or happiness, lowered anxiety, lowered depression, better relationships with your kids. Now, one type of relationship that we're often talking about here is romantic relationships or soulmates. I would say that a huge factor in the success of my relationship with my wife has to do with all the therapy that I've been through. Well, one place you can find a therapist to help with that is at BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk. All right, now let's talk about Jovi and Yara. So overall, I think that Jovi, if we focus on him first, again, this is all speculative. Overall, I think that he can be a healthy and functional partner. The things that they focus on these shows that we've seen him in are concerning, but he often will be able to recover in the end and show that he does understand what's happening. He does have empathy. He can effectively communicate it without being defensive. So what's going on with him, though, because there's something going on if we go off the edit, which we don't know if there's any shenanigans or, even in the editing, there could be shenanigans with the editing. But what is his issue? Well, seemingly from the edit, part of him is stuck in adolescence. And one way of seeing that is that he's immature. That's not what I'm saying. But it's possible that he had some issue with authority, some complicated history with authority growing up, maybe during his teenage years. I don't know. Maybe there was peer pressure involved and he got in trouble, or I don't know. It's just a lot of different possibilities, because the theme to his issues is that he wants to remain free to do things that are often associated with younger people and being single. The ability to go to a strip club, the ability to drink, the ability to just walk off on your own, the ability to make your own career choices and that sort of thing. And I think that it's possible that he hasn't fully developed or matured regarding the tension and the conflict in all of us between freedom and responsibility. And as a part of projective identification, he will project onto Yara the unreasonable authority of his past, if that exists at all, and treat it as unreasonable, of just like, like if he had a strict father or something, I don't know, who was really, really overly strict, maybe for religious reasons or something, and he would get pressure from his friends to drink and go to strip clubs and have fun, and he would really enjoy that and felt he deserved it, but also was being rejected and was afraid of his dad. And so I'm just making up stories, but he could have been stuck. He could still be stuck in that place of, hey, because you rinse and repeat that enough and his personality goes in a particular direction, then by the time you're 18, when you're in that situation, if this is somewhat true for Jovi, then you just have this belief that, look, I deserve to do things. And it's true that maybe he was overly controlled from the outside, and he did deserve to do more. But it's not so simple. It's not as simple as whenever I want something, I deserve it. And whenever somebody is imposing some restriction on that, they are being unreasonable. You could see someone just applying that to later situations. So I think that there seems to be something going on there with him. Also, when he's triggered, he does seem to regress to that place. There is an adolescent vibe to him when he walks away and is dismissive of Yara, and he's just like, whatever, you're crazy, that kind of stuff, self-centered. And then there seems to possibly be a passive-aggressive response from him. He might have even done that to the authority that he had a complication with, that he could have said, well, okay, if you're going to restrict me unreasonably or you're going to harm me because I broke a minor rule, then I'm going to get back at you by sneaking out the window and taking your car out for a spin, or just because I want to get back at you. Okay, that's a passive way of communicating your upsetness and your anger. And it's possible that the thing that happened this season with him going to the strip club was something along those lines, because she had hurt him by telling him that she was on birth control and not wanting to have kids right away. Now, of course, that, I've been down that. She has the right to make those choices, particularly when they're fighting about it, and his demand that she be pregnant is not viable and is highly problematic. But from his perspective, at the very least, he thought that it was unfair that she lied to him. And you could argue that that's true, that she should have said something. She has the right to say no, but she should have said, I'm saying no to that. It's hard to know the circumstances around that, but the passive aggression of, like, I'm hurt, I feel harmed, I feel mistreated, I'm going to get back at you, but I'm not going to go at you. I'm not going to assert myself and go to you and say, hey, you hurt my feelings, let's talk about this. I'm going to get back at you a different way. But on the show, we did see him recover. I didn't show those scenes necessarily because they were kind of interspersed, but he did show, once again, as he has in other seasons, that he can have empathy, even about, the strip club thing and the lying. And he, over time, was able to understand more and to communicate it better. There was a scene between the two of them where he was saying, look, I knew that you didn't want me to go to the strip club, but I just thought it was because you thought it was a bad thing. I didn't realize that it triggered your trauma about shame, about your body. I don't want you to feel that way. I didn't know it would make you feel that way. I understand that it made you feel that way, and it makes total sense, and I'm sorry, and I will never do that again now that I know. And that could be an example of how these two people actually work really well together, because it's almost a universal thing that as you develop your relationship, as it gets better and closer, a major element of that is learning the relational traumas of your partner such that you can avoid triggering it. So many of us either don't know our relational traumas, or we're ashamed of it, or we're not wholly aware of it. So we will get upset and say, hey, don't go to the strip club. That's ridiculous. You're dumb. Don't be such a child. And that will come across a certain way, and that's not what Yara did, but I'm emphasizing. That'll come across a certain way to the partner, but it's a much different request for change of behavior in your partner if you say, I have traumas around that, and it hurts me. Before I even met you, I had these problems. And when you do that thing, it really triggers that for me. And I would love it if you could just avoid doing that, because it's not a horrible thing that you do. It's not great, but it's not horrible, but it feels horrible to me. So it's a taking responsibility. It's not blaming the partner for your entire reaction, because it doesn't make sense to blame your partner for the entire reaction. And it engages the empathy of your partner instead of the compliance of your partner. And they exhibited that pretty well, and I think that's a huge strength of theirs. And it's a strength not only of their relationship, but I think it's a strength of both of their personalities and their ability to communicate that, understand it, take the time, and admit it. He was able to come around, rather quickly, honestly. I mean, they had it was the strip club was one night. The next day, they fought in the morning. Then they fought on the boat. Then they had to talk about it during this situation. And then by this evening, it was 24 hours, he is already being kind at the very least. He wasn't being comprehensive the way he was, I think, the next day, where he was able to really communicate and understand what was happening. The other thing with Jovi, of course, is alcohol. And usually these kinds of problems, if they exist at all with Jovi, they usually get worse over time. So, it's not a wonderful prognosis there, but who knows. So with Yara, we learned this season that she, according to her, in Ukrainian culture, there is a sexist, I mean, she didn't identify it. Well, did she say it was for women? Maybe she did. But at the very least, she, from a lot of angles, her mom, her friends, her society, was made to feel like she's not good enough, that if she gains weight or doesn't look perfect physically, that there is something deeply wrong with her, and it's all her fault. It's a very shameful thing. Even after you have a kid, that there's something disgusting and wrong about you if you don't look perfect. And it also sounded like it extends into being perfect, like you have to be perfect. You also have to have, seemingly, according to her revelation in therapy, that she believes that if her husband and her relationship isn't perfect, then she should be ashamed of herself. And I think that actually strangely plays into the hypothesis or the characterization that Ed had of them being a cardboard couple, that she desperately tries to put forth a persona of her and her husband and her relationship, her kid, her life, her home, such that it'll stave off any kind of shaming, right? So, there seems to be some evidence of that. Also, maybe her medical procedures had something to do with that as well. I don't know. It seems likely, given was it this? I don't think it was this season. I think it was maybe another season where she was talking about having had a kid and the changes to her body and the procedures that she went through to try to account for that. So I think that there's a lot to say there. And Jovi plays into this, of course, because he has apparently said some things. He tried to repair it in this last episode, by saying, you're beautiful, and you're beautiful than any stripper. You're the most beautiful person in the world. So, that could help. But I think there's a lot more repair that probably needs to be done. And it'd be best if it didn't matter if she's beautiful. That, okay, fine. What if she wasn't the most beautiful person in the room? What if there was a stripper that was more beautiful in his eyes, objectively, just like in terms of the way well, then what? Well, it shouldn't matter, is the thing. If we hang, because if, it's a good temporary Band-Aid of just like, you're beautiful, and it's honest. I think he was being honest, but more fundamentally, it'd be nice if they could switch away from this notion that somehow her beauty is connected to his love or their relationship or her not having shame, that kind of thing. So, that'd be my hope there. But we did see more evidence that she seemingly walks around with the perpetual state that she feels ashamed of her body, of her husband, of her life, and she is not easily reassured. Kalani would often try to really reassure her, and she would absorb it and take it, but it didn't seem to land on fertile ground. It seemed that she's like, oh, that's nice of you, but she seemed to indicate that she didn't really believe it. It's not really sinking in. I mean, you just got to figure the amount of messages and internalizations that she's had growing up around being ashamed of herself, would have to be pretty extensive. It sounded like it was. Now, I will say that she handles conflict with Jovi pretty well. She will display emotion pretty appropriately and in a differentiated way. She doesn't attack him too much, really. She will assert herself, but not in a confused way. She'll say statements that are, I think, not necessarily helpful, but understandable. She gives it time, their conflict. She doesn't just throw up her hands. She seems to have some trust that maybe things will work out as things move on into the future. She's willing to listen to him when he finally starts to come around. And she does advocate for herself. Like when I was worried that, like with Ed and Liz, Ed will, at least on camera, do really the bare minimum. He will be pseudo-apologetic and pseudo-nice, but still attacking. Then they get back together, and then he just they both seem to avoid the topic of the conflict and everything that was happening, and he just says a lot of generic things about how much he loves her and about how he's grown and he's learned things, but he doesn't follow it up with any example. And then Liz just sees that, and I think because she believes that's as good as it's ever going to get, then she's just like, okay, then I'm back in it. Whereas for Yara, I was worried she was going to do the same thing, but she didn't. Jovi was nice and was kind of apologetic, but it wasn't clear what he was apologizing for. And she didn't attack him or anything. She just kind of kept saying the things in a way that was apparently helping him to come around. And then eventually he came around. Because if she would have, let it go earlier, then it wouldn't have gotten to the point where full understanding would be achieved. So she engineered that, and I think that shows a lot of strength for her. So overall, their relationship, I would say, yeah, lots of strengths, and really lots of strengths for both of them. Jovi is easy to hate, but and maybe some of you don't, I don't know, but he has a lot of positive qualities. I think qualities that he doesn't like to advertise, honestly, because of his idea of masculinity or something. I think he is probably behind the scenes, he can be very empathetic and sweet and nice and accommodating. I think sometimes, at least on the show, he tries to come across a certain way. And I'm sure that that's in him, but I don't think necessarily that's like his baseline. My dogs are barking. Okay. Angela and Michael, not much to say. I don't really feel like talking about them anyway. They weren't on the show that much. They were really shoehorned in. Molly and Kelly, same. I don't really know them that well. This is the first season I'd seen them, and they bugged out halfway through the season. But Kelly did seem to be pretty healthy. He was assertive. He was emotional. He didn't attack unnecessarily. He stood up for himself. He mourned. He didn't get defensive, seemingly. Molly, on the other hand, seemingly was denying her responsibility and was really trying to blame Kelly for what seemed to be her desire to break up and divorce. And that points to some kind of relational trauma for her around being responsible for something, being abused or harmed because she did make a mistake or because she did take an action. Like she made a choice, and like, who knows, but one possibility out of thousands is that her parents got divorced and she was asked by her parents or her family or the lawyers or whatever who she wanted to be living with, and she's in a bind. She makes a choice, and then she's punished by the other parent for a long time about that. And that could develop a complex around, hey, I deserve to make my choices, and you can't blame me for that. So I'm not going to be blamed for making a choice that I had to make or that I didn't want to make, or So throughout the beginning of the season, it seemed to be that she had made a choice. She wanted to leave Kelly, but was determined to avoid any kind of implication that the decision came from her, and was a decision based on how much of an idiot Kelly was, or that Kelly was the one that broke up. She was really trying to do that. And again, that points to some sort of issue for her. All right, and lastly, Kalani and Asuelu. Well, Asuelu, he clearly has something that eclipses his better judgment and his empathy. It's hard to know what's going on with him, because he clearly doesn't want to lose his family or his marriage. It's pretty clear that he wants to be married, and yet he continued to cheat. So what's going on there? If he's a psychopath, then that would make sense, but then that would mean that he's very good at acting like he cares, which can be true, but it doesn't look that way to me. So I think he genuinely does care and is genuinely remorseful afterwards. So then you have, if that's true, then why repetitively cheating? and repetitively having remorse. What's going on there? Now, I think the simplistic answer, which could be a factor, is that he was raised in a society, apparently. I've heard from a lot of people from Samoa who will say that this is how men are raised, generally speaking, not all of them, to believe that they can cheat if they want to, that the way that mothers will treat their boys is to treat them like they're gods and also like their children their entire lives, so they never really develop responsibilities. I don't know if any of this is true. I'm just hearing this from people. And certainly you could see the way that their family was, how that could be the case. It's hard to know. And that could be a factor. But I have a hard time believing that literally every guy raised in that society does this sort of thing. It just doesn't seem likely. So why else would this happen? Well, there's also a theme of underfunctioning for him from the very beginning, that he comes across like a child. He's incompetent. He is fun-loving and doesn't take things seriously. He doesn't rise to the occasion. He kind of pushed from the very beginning. Kalani had to be the adult in the room. And when people underfunction, then we wonder, well, why are they underfunctioning? Well, often it's because they, as children, were made to feel like a screw-up, or they were denied opportunities to succeed such that they don't think of themselves as competent adults, even though they, on paper, know that they are an adult. There's a lot of roads to underfunctioning, but, those are some. Like, just going off of the factor of culture, you could, by babying your child and protecting them and making excuses for them, deny them the opportunity to play around with responsibility and tasks and risking falling on their face, such that they could be an adult and have no confidence that they have the ability to strike out on their own and succeed. And therefore, when they enter into something that calls on their competence, they are pretty sure they're going to mess it up, even though they might not. And as a consequence, they might sabotage themselves just to get it over with, that kind of thing, or sabotage themselves to pull in an overfunctioner so that they'll take care of them, that kind of thing. There's a lot I can say there, but there seems to be some theme of that, and it's possible that his cheating behavior was a part of that. It wouldn't be unusual for that to happen. There's another possibility of passive aggression. Cheating often will have a passive aggressive motivation to it, and with passive aggressive people, with people with hidden hostility, they often were mistreated growing up in a stern way, such that they learned that they couldn't express their anger or even have anger because it was a threat and it wasn't welcome and it was maybe abused out of them. But they still have the anger, so they have to express it somehow. And one way you can express it is by cheating, is by getting back. And so it's possible that because Kalani is an overfunctioner, which I'll get to in a second. And we didn't see a lot of it this season, but we definitely saw a lot of it before. We saw a little bit of it this season in the beginning when they were playing that game, and she was just berating him when he had the blindfold on. So there's that dynamic that probably plays out a lot, especially when you're trying to take care of two young kids. And there's a lot of opportunity for him to underfunction or, in her eyes, screw things up and comment on it, right? And that would be very hurtful. And if you don't have a way of expressing your anger, which when we look at Asuelu, did we ever see him get angry? Ever? We saw Kalani get angry, and she would express it in a variety of ways. She wasn't aggressive, but she would be upset, I mean, I guess we saw him get angry maybe in that very first season when they were at home. But he's very quick to be calm. And you can imagine that at least a lot of his anger gets suppressed and isn't able to be displayed or communicated, and it has to come out some way, and it could come out through cheating. He could experience some parenting undermining or putting down, and he could be sabotaging himself as well and also kind of messing up at times. And then that happens for a week, and he just can't take it anymore, and he's like, I'm going out with my buddies. and he regresses, and I'm an adolescent, I'm hanging out with my friends, and then there's a woman, and he is like, I deserve this, or I want to impress my friends, or I want to get back at Kalani, and so I'm going to get together with that person. And then he gets home, and with these defenses, they often both serve the defense and cause the defense. So it serves the defense by allowing the expression of anger, but they cause the defense because now he's screwing up again because he is caught, and his demeanor when he is caught is in line with all this, because you just see him, he's just like, oh, I screwed up. What's wrong with? I don't know what's wrong with me. He seems genuinely distraught by it, and also not taking the reins to figure out what's wrong with him, because he probably thinks of himself as a child, and also hopes that someone will step in and figure it out for him. If he just creates a vacuum of, okay, something's wrong here, and all this is subconscious, or most of it is, something's wrong with me. I agree, something's wrong with me. I don't know what to do. And there's a hope that someone will come in and fix it, right? So, it kind of fits with that. There's also a possibility that ADHD is involved. I haven't seen any signs of that, but, for some people who have ADHD and, they have a pattern of expressing their behavior in a way that could lead to cheating. I'll just say that. It's not like people with ADHD cheat necessarily, but it can cause someone to have another reason, like if he did have some executive function issues and he has a fight with Kalani, he goes out with his buddies and he gets a little drunk, and there's a woman and they start to flirt, and without ADHD, he would be able to find the decision-making skills to pull together all the memories and all the factors in the moment to say, I need to pull away from this person because I don't want to cheat. Whereas for someone with ADHD, they're in that situation, they might have a hard time pulling all those things together to make a decision that's best for them. Whereas the woman is right in front of him, that's what he sees, and that's what is occupying his attention, and he can't really hold on to the other factors that aren't really in front of his face. That's a common condition. That's a common scenario for people with ADHD. A more mundane is that you have a teenager that is at school, and there's a project due tomorrow, and the teacher is like, okay, the teacher even sits down with the kid. Okay, here's the worksheet. You got to make sure you do that. You follow the steps. And the kid's like, yes, I'm going to do it. I really want to do it. I don't want to fail this class. I'm gonna do the project. They go home, and they're still like, okay, I got to do my project. They sit down, and they have a TV and a Nintendo in their room, and they sit down. It's funny, I think about the clients that I used to treat back in the day, and there would be a TV and a Nintendo. I suppose today it'd just be their phone, right, or a Switch or something. Switch, right? Is that anyway? But anyway, there's a video game or a phone or something, and they're just like, oh, I'll just play one game, and then I'll be able to calm down, and then boom, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and their parents tell them to go to bed, and they're like, wait, what happened to the time? It's a very common experience for people with ADHD. They want something, but because it's not directly in front of their face, it's hard for them to really retain the importance of it. They haven't forgotten it really. They can recall it, but there's something about something being right there and stimulating that can cause the attention to be pointed in that direction. So going on to Kalani, lots of strengths. She has some self-esteem issues, but I think she has a pretty good sense of her self-esteem, and she doesn't tend to overreact in conflict. She seems to, at least on camera this season. So she does overfunction, and we did see a little bit at the beginning of the season. If we didn't see that little tidbit at the beginning of the season, I would wonder if it had gone away or had diminished, but we saw it in a scenario where it really just didn't make any sense for it to occur, and it was in sharp contrast to all the other couples. So I don't know. It's hard. I can't gauge it, of course, but based on the edit, it's possible that it's still going strong in some way. I don't know. It's even possible we saw less of it this season because she doesn't feel as involved with us because she's pulling away. And the closer she gets to someone, the more she starts to do that to someone. Anyway, I don't know. But She does have seemingly a pretty good sense of herself and a pretty good self-esteem. We saw evidence this season and really throughout that she might have a moderate disconnection with the self, meaning that she doesn't know her needs or feel the right to have needs or emotions. And she would benefit by getting into more contact with her needs and be able to feel okay with wanting something independent or even in conflict with what other people want for her. She got through that this season, which says that she doesn't have a full-blown disconnection with the self, but we did see some ambiguity as she was trying to assert herself. Most importantly, that she essentially had to engage with someone else in a clandestine way before she could actually, that would prompt her to force her to assert her needs rather than just being able to assert her needs and then move on to another person. Anyway, so they broke up, and we don't know. They could get back together. Those things happen, for in a variety of scenarios. Kalani could have a disastrous breakup with this other guy, and it could cause her to say, "Oh, I'm going to go back," and then they're back together. Her and Asuelu, who knows? Time could pass, and Asuelu could get therapy and change in some very significant ways, and re-engage with Kalani, and Kalani could re-engage because that, there's just a lot of reasons. But regarding Kalani, though, there's just a huge question mark about her moving into the future, because I think her narrative is that everything's fine as long as she can just get rid of the dead weight of Asuelu, then everything will be okay. And maybe it will. But in all likelihood, the issues that dovetailed well with Asuelu will carry forward for her. I don't know that, of course, but unless there's significant treatment and contemplation and corrective experiences over time, it would be very unusual for that to just disappear. Now, some people have the fortune to to meet someone and be involved with them romantically such that that person doesn't really, like, if this next guy or her eventual long-term relationship partner isn't an underfunctioner and is fairly differentiated and fairly securely attached, and maybe they're a little underfunctioning, and she will try to engage in more overfunctioning, which would mean that he would have to become more underfunctioning. But let's say he's pretty healthy and is able to communicate his needs, and it doesn't ever get out of whack. Well, even though her issues are carried into the future, it's possible that in that scenario, it wouldn't ruin things. It would actually be given an opportunity in that to actually change, and there would be a corrective experience there for her because she wouldn't experience this thing. Anyway, so that's possible, but that's not typical. The typical thing is that unless we have significant change, often through therapy, then our personality persists. It might get manifested in different ways in different relationships, but often it just gets manifested in the exact same way, even though we didn't think it would. Like with this new guy, the way she talks about him, she says that he treats her well, and I think she said something like he has his life together. I would assume that his life is together, because I would have a hard time believing that she would go for someone that had Asuelu characteristics of someone that doesn't have their life together. So, let's just say that he has his life together and he's very nice to her. Of course, it's the beginning of a relationship, so who knows what that means, because, of course, Asuelu was nice to her when they first met, But it's possible that there's a different element of underfunctioning, like he has his job is going okay, he pays his bills, but he drinks every night, or he smokes weed chronically, or he's terrible with gambling or something. Often what will happen is we will be moving on from our past partner and trying to correct for it by choosing a new sort of person. But unless we address who we are and our issues, not only are we likely to recreate the problems in the future, regardless of the next partner, but we'll also sniff someone out that will give us the ability to recreate that past relationship, from our childhood. So, the unconscious is pretty tricky in that way. It's not really like this, but it's like the unconscious is saying, okay, fine, you consciously are trying to avoid an underfunctioner, but we still need an underfunctioner. So I'm going to trick you, ego, by telling you that this person is great because, look, they have a job, and but we know deep down that person actually does show signs of underfunctioning, and especially if we treat them in a certain way, then they'll become even more underfunctioning, blah, blah, blah. And there's a reverse to that other person that's like secretly wanting the other person to overfunction. Anyway, so it's, I guess I'm just kind of worried about Kalani, given particularly her presentation this season, that she very quickly moved on prematurely in a lot of ways, you could say, and seemingly was framing everything around, well, he wants to be with me. I unblocked him. He came, and he wants to see me. And there's not a lot of, well, okay, what do I want? And maybe it would have been that, but there wasn't a lot of that. And so there's also a possibility, there's no evidence of this, but what if he is presenting a very love-bomby, very dominant, very assertive presentation, which could be benign and wonderful, but it also could be a precursor to a dominant, abusive relationship. Again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I don't know. I guess I'm just protective of Kalani. I worry about her, and I guess I can't trust that she won't make a mistake there. But why am I feeling that way? I guess if I were to evaluate any sort of countertransference or transference, it's that she might have an underfunctioning aspect to herself, which is often the case, that she projects onto others. She doesn't want the underfunctioning part of herself, so she finds someone that exhibits that, she projects that, and then attacks it. And so I'm detecting that, and I'm becoming an overfunctioner by trying to protect her when she's a grown adult. I don't know. Something to contemplate. Well, that does it for the end of my first final thoughts. Am I calling it final thoughts episode? I put it in my notes. What am I calling this? Yeah, final thoughts. So, Last Resort, Season 1, final thoughts. Let me know your final thoughts in the comments. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.